Hello and welcome to day two. I hope that everyone got something out of yesterday. We focused on sleep for our Hormone Healthy Holiday Challenge. And you might be surprised to know that there are 10 hormones that control our weight. So we're not just going to be talking about estrogen and testosterone this week, but also hormones related to stress, sleep, blood sugar, and more. So as I mentioned yesterday, the challenge isn't to do every recommendation from every day. It's really to pick one or two small things that you can incorporate per day or just total that don't feel overwhelming. And then we can just start to layer in those small shifts. And that's really what adds up to massive changes. So to recap yesterday, there are 4 pillars of health that we have a high degree of control over. So that's really where we're focusing, getting the most bang for our buck. Food, movement, stress, and sleep. Check out yesterday's video. We did a deep dive on sleep and how that's associated with blood sugar, with weight, with hormone dysregulation. Today, we're going to be focusing on adrenals, cortisol, and stress, and how that impacts our weight and our health. Now, before we dive in, I just want to clarify, stress can be positive or negative. So I think a lot of people have this idea that it's all negative, but stress comes from exercise. Stress comes from the holidays. Stress comes from things like getting married or having a baby. Positive life changes can be stressful too. And that's not even to mention work stress or getting cut off in traffic. The other factor that's important to know is that stress can be real or perceived. And let that sink in. It doesn't even have to be, we don't have to judge if someone's life is stressful or not. It's how our brain perceives something and the story we're telling ourselves. The body responds the same, whether it's positive, negative, real, or perceived. Now, stress response in cortisol starts in the brain. Now, this is the beginning of the HPA axis you may have heard of. That's the hypothalamic-pituitary-adrenal axis. Now, the cortisol response, as I mentioned, you get a stressor. It starts in the hypothalamus. It sends out this signal to the pituitary gland, which goes down to the adrenal glands to produce cortisol. The adrenal glands sit right on top of our kidneys. So the point of cortisol is just to give your body energy from sugar and protein to fight or flight, basically. But it also suppresses our immune system, and it increases our blood pressure, so we get more blood flow to our extremities and to our muscles so we can run. Decreases digestion. Now, I see a lot of women with gastrointestinal issues, and what happens, the GI symptoms come when your gastrointestinal tract gets shut down because you don't need to digest when you're fleeing, right? And it also it shuts down our sex hormone response. So irregular periods, low sex drive, things like that. Now, after age about 35 to 40, as our ovaries start to wind down into retirement over the course of the next 10 years or so, we start to rely even more heavily on our adrenals. And so if they're already stressed out or depleted of nutrients or not functioning properly, the symptoms can just get worse. So we can test cortisol by measuring and evaluating your stress response, either in blood or urine. And we can even get a kind of an idea of what's going on based on your mineral ratios in a hair mineral analysis test. So cortisol comes from the adrenal glands, but our brain sends out the signal. So there's several hormones that are influenced by sleep and circadian rhythm. Yesterday, we talked about one, which is melatonin. Today, cortisol is going to be the primary area of focus. That's our stress hormone. It also spikes our blood sugar. And then leptin and ghrelin, obviously the hunger and satiety hormones. So cortisol, it's a good thing. You can't live without it. It keeps us alive. But the problem is when it's chronic, it starts to drive up our blood sugar, inflammation, and visceral fat storage, that dreaded menopause belly. This plays a huge role. So when you feel that stress response, the reality is none of us can just go escape and live in a monastery somewhere or just quit our jobs. But when you feel that familiar surge, that stress response, when you've gotten in a fight with someone or received a stressful email or a tight deadline or almost gotten cut off in traffic, it's that surge of adrenaline and cortisol rushes through you. The worst thing you could do is just sit there. Get up and move. That's my number one tip. We've just received this surge of cortisol, adrenaline, and blood sugar so that we can fight or flight. But in order to pull that out of our bloodstream into our muscles, just get up, take a walk around the block, or do some yoga stretches or calf raises behind your desk. Anything that's going to pull that out of the bloodstream and use it instead of driving up inflammation, blood sugar, and fat storage, belly fat storage in particular. We can also support our adrenals through one of my favorite ways is a medical grade electrolyte supplement or adaptogens. This is one of my favorites. There's not a lot out there that don't contain loads of additives, colorings, flavorings, sugars. Body Bio is one that I use daily. Even in a pinch, a little bit of Celtic sea salt can be incredible just for helping to support your adrenals and for energy production in the afternoon. I think the magic behind that is also there's hundreds of micronutrients in there. Even things like there's flavored electrolytes like Element that do contain stevia if you can tolerate that. Or I just keep this at my desk. It's an adaptogenic herbal combination that helps when I feel stressed. So adaptogens, if you don't know, those are plants and mushrooms that help your body just respond better to stress, to anxiety, to fatigue. It supports your adrenals and your hormones. So things like ashwagandha, astragalus, a lot of them are in teas like tulsi or licorice root. Turmeric is one, and cordyceps mushrooms. So I also really like castor oil packs because they help support your nervous system, but also they help support your digestion, hormones, sleep, detoxification. And as you're starting to see, we can't just isolate one. It needs to really be a comprehensive approach for your body to respond in the best possible way and to be able to come back into balance and homeostasis, which is our ultimate goal. So what adrenals do, a quick recap. So they regulate the sodium and potassium and magnesium. Those are the electrolytes. And so stress depletes magnesium, but it also depletes zinc, calcium, iron. So when I do a hair mineral analysis test, it's what I see probably in 95% of the women that I work with is a low sodium to magnesium ratio. And this is kind of the adrenals resilience ratio, essentially. But we all have a unique stress signature where we burn through more of certain minerals. So I always find that to be interesting too. And it's a great reason to test, to know exactly, how to support your body because we're all so uniquely biochemically individual. But magnesium is a great thing. That could be its own whole talk. Magnesium is nature's anti-stress mineral, and probably 80% of people are depleted. It's critical for energy, for supporting the HPA axis, and it's just very calming. As we talked about yesterday, it can kind of support those calming neurotransmitters and get you ready for sleep. So quick overview, the external stressor comes, you have this hypervigilant brain, and then it overstimulates your nervous system and also your immune system. And that's what leads to this too many stress hormones in the system, adrenaline, cortisol. What this does to our brain is it can actually shrink the prefrontal cortex. That is our rational thinking brain. And that's why people come to me with things like brain fog or, you walk into the kitchen and can't quite remember what you came in there for. It can also shrink your hippocampus, which is responsible for memories, and it kind of gives us a break when we're in that constant fight or flight mode. So when you get that rush of cortisol, blood sugar, adrenaline, first thing you can do is just take a break, do a little movement. Another really critical thing is muscle. Not just for cortisol, but once we're over 35 to 40, if there's any sort of imbalances in weight and blood sugar, that is massively important. So especially, after 35 or 40, everything changes. And that's one of the most important things you can do. So we need more nutrients when we're stressed out. As I mentioned, it pulls and drains us of these critical nutrients far more quickly because our adrenals are working really hard to manage cortisol, to make sex hormones, and especially as our ovaries come into retirement over that 10-year period of perimenopause into menopause, that is even more important because it actually will break down our muscle to get those nutrients. It's that critical. So less muscle means less insulin receptors, and then blood sugar drives cortisol, and cortisol drives blood sugar. So you're seeing this sort of vicious cycle. So if you suspect blood sugar fluctuations, we can definitely test for those. I like to look at fasting glucose and fasting insulin, or you can get a continuous glucose monitor. But you can also just focus on consuming a low glycemic diet that prioritizes protein, veggies, and healthy fat. That's going to help support blood sugar and adrenal health. Getting in physical activity, any kind of physical activity that brings you joy, is going to make be a big make a big difference in supporting your cortisol, in reducing inflammation, in building muscle. And then obviously check back and watch yesterday's to learn more about the importance of sleep hygiene habits. But any type of exercise or movement pulls that glucose out of the bloodstream and puts it to work in your muscles. So rather than staying high and causing more inflammation and oxidative damage. So if you take one thing away, that would be the big one. After meals is a great time as well. But today's challenge is take a walk after a meal. Even if it's a short walk around the block, that's an amazing way to blunt blood sugar spikes after you eat. And this is something you can do as we are heading into the holiday festivities. And there's going to be lots of celebrations focused around lots of delicious food. A little bit of movement goes a long way in just blunting that blood sugar spike, which also drives cortisol. And then incorporate some heavier weights. That's another thing you can do. Lift heavier weights, not the baby weights. And then implement a stress management practice, something like yoga or meditation or deep breathing. All of those things stimulate your vagus nerve that connects your gut-brain axis. They help us to reset our parasympathetic, that rest and digest nervous system, in addition to reducing cortisol. So I hope that you will pick one thing that we talked about today and start incorporating it right away. Carry it through the holidays. I hope you're seeing that it doesn't have to be something overwhelming. It doesn't have to be something that we put off to till tomorrow or till Monday or till after the new year to start really making an impact on our health and looking and feeling better. I would love to hear from you. What did you pick? And what are you going to start implementing today? Send me a DM and then join me tomorrow at the same time. We're going to be talking about more focused on nutrition and diet. So 11:30 a.m. Pacific, 1:30 p.m. Central. Looking forward to seeing you there.